It's Professor Chew, and today I'm going to be talking about the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And Homer's Odyssey. It's part of our assignment for our first week of class. The music for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which was made by the Coen brothers in 2000, was a commercial success, just as much, in fact, even more than the movie was. From the start, the score was conceived as integral to the script, and it actually resulted in a heightened interest in bluegrass music and brought renewed interest and monetary rewards to many of the musicians whose performances were included in the movie. In fact, as producer and musician T-Bone Burnett said, the soundtrack was a phenomenon. The most amazing story was about James Carter, who sang the first song on the album. The name of that song is Poor Lazarus. James Carter was in the penitentiary at Partridge Farm in Mississippi in 1959 when Alan Lomax, who was a folklorist in the mid-20th century, recorded him singing Poor Lazarus, which is a 100-years-old song. After Oh Brother, Where Art Thou became a #1 hit all over the U.S., the Lomax Foundation actually hired a detective and tracked James Carter down. They found him married to a storefront preacher in Chicago. He didn't even remember recording the song. The Lomax lawyers had a check for him, which was the first of many. It's a great story. And, I mean, of course, you know, the movie got a lot of renown for other reasons. George Clooney, starring as Everett, the lawyer in prison for practicing law without a license, received a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor, and the film was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy. You can't really call Oh Brother, Where Art Thou a musical, per se, like Singing in the Rain, you know, but the music is certainly, again, integral to it. And, of course, it's also a satire about the South, a satire about various types in the South, including, for instance, the Bible salesman, played by John Goodman. But, again, I want to return to the music. It's a really important part of the movie, and it's also something I want you to really think about while you're taking this class. You know, of course, when we think about movies, we think about things that we see. Even the word theater. Well, this part of this word theater is actually from a Greek word, theaomai, which means to see. And, of course, the ancient Greeks, themselves built many theaters. You can go and visit them today in ancient Greece. And they performed plays and tragedies and comedies there. In fact, next week we're going to be reading some Greek tragedies and talking a little bit then about ancient Greek tragedy and how it was staged. And of course today, most of us don't necessarily or even go to a theater to watch a movie. I myself am just as likely to watch a movie on my phone, or of course on, a trusty iPad. And, that, of course, is a big difference. You know, for many of us, watching a movie is now a very solitary experience, whereas for the ancient Greeks, you only experience theater in a community of people. So, but to get back to the point, which was I was talking about the music of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The music of this movie is an integral part of it. You need to listen really closely. In other words, I encourage you not only in watching the movie, but to listen to it, to think about what you're hearing. Even, and in particular, to think about a few things about the music. In some places in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, the music is something that is called diegetic. Diegetic. So this is a term that means that the music that the characters in the movie hear is also what we, the audience, are hearing. You know, think about what that means. That means that, to some degree, we're having the same experience as the characters are in the film. We're all hearing exactly the same thing. A notable example of such diegetic music occurs in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? For instance, I'm getting my technology working here. Of course, in the very, very famous scene, right? When the Soggy Bottom Boys are performing their hit song, A Man of Constant Sorrows, we're here, they're performing the music. We're seeing them perform the music. The audience in the movie's performing the music. Another great example, of course, is the baptism scene. That's not the baptism scene. Is the baptism scene, yes, where Everett, Pete, and Delmar, the three convicts, there's Delmar on the lamb, there's that poor Lazarus shot, keeps coming back, see a bunch of, see a number of people going to be baptized in the river, and Delmar and Pete run in and join them. Let's see if Delmar will stay on the screen. There he is again. Okay. And I'm showing you these pictures, by the way. I've seen this movie several times. I've read the Odyssey even more times than that. But I don't know if you have, so I'm just giving you these as some kinds of references. So you can, either notice them when you watch the movie yourself or review it again. Or also, I will also, just so you know, be at some point later on today, definitely by tomorrow morning, putting in some lecture notes that would have some references to these scenes, because I know I make a lot of references while I'm talking, and I want to make sure you catch everything. Also, just another point about this concept of diegetic music. Well, it is a very, it's really come up recently because of a film that's getting a lot of attention right now, Birdman, Michael Keaton. The music in that movie is diegetic. There's a number of, there's a lot of this. Let's give you a listen. Okay, so in other words, there's drumming in the background of that scene. There's actually a drummer in the movie in Birdman, and we, the viewers, can we hear the drumming. The characters in the movie hear the drumming. Sometimes we see the drummers in the movie, and it's all, one way you can think about it is it's another way of drawing us as the audience right into the action of the movie. Now, just again, a few more notes about the music. I kept showing by accident, right? That picture of the initial. It's an initial shot from "O Brother, Where Art Thou," where as you know, the movie is the plot in the movie is that Everett, Pete, and Delmar are convicts who somehow they're part of a chain gang. They escape. Everett is the leader. He has convinced the other two guys that he has a buried treasure, that he says that he robbed an armored car and took his treasure and buried it in this cabin, and that they have to get out and get the treasure because in 4 days there's a river is going to come flooding through the area where the cabin is, excuse me. So that's his reason for getting the other two guys to escape with him, and the movie, though, starts with the chain gang. So the chain gang is, they're all African-American, and there's another shot of the chain gang. There you go. So that is the foreman watching the chainmen in the field, and as we know from watching the movie, our friends, the convicts, are actually escaping while some of this is going on. What's interesting about the music in that particular scene is that it is a recording of a song called Poor Lazarus. And it actually is the original recording, apparently that Alan Lomax made, Alan Lomax the folklorist. And so the actors are lip-syncing to it. So, I think thinking about that, the context of when that music was sung, and then thinking about it, the way it's used in the movie, can be very powerful. And it kind of adds an extra resonance to the music. And of course, once again, the idea of sound and listening and music and the way that sound and music can draw us together as a community is a big part of O Brother, Where Art Thou? Another central character in the movie is Pappy O'Daniel. He is the incumbent governor of Mississippi. Pappy O'Daniel was actually a real person, though he was not the governor of Mississippi. He was the governor of Texas. Anyway, so Pappy, whose name is Menelaus, actually, which is a reference to Greek mythology. His name up here, Menelaus. Pappy's running for re-election. and he's challenged by an upstart, a populist politician whose name is Homer Stokes, and that's of course a name, Homer, that makes us look. Raise a little red flag. Anyway, so Pappy O'Daniel, one of his claims to fame is that he has the radio show The Flower Hour, when he makes broadcasts that everybody listens to on the radio. And at one point, even early, fairly in the first half of the movie, Everett and Company, they meet an African American singer whose name is Tommy Johnson. It's a fairly obvious reference, if you know the history of American music, to a Delta blues singer named Robert Johnson, who said that he acquired his skill as a musician by making a compact with the devil. And Tommy says exactly the same thing. And if you're watching the movie, Everett and Pete and Delmar actually pick up Tommy at a crossroads, which is, not only in, I think, in American mythology, but certainly in Greek mythology, wherever roads cross, that's a place where something happens. Everett and Tommy and Pete and Delmar all record the song The Man of Constant Sorrows. They get $10 for it each from the blind engineer of the radio station. And, they don't seem to think too much of it, but as the movie rolls along in the plot, the song becomes sung by the Soggy Bottom Boys. The Man of Constant Sorrows becomes a huge radio hit, and everyone wants to find them. And then, later on in the movie, the three and then the four of them, end up performing The Man of Constant Sorrows at a campaign rally. And, everyone loves it. Everyone's excited to see them. You have this great scene where there's a song going on, and there's, the community is all wrapped up, and there are politicians who are watching them singing. I mean, think about all those resonances, because these connections between music and what's popular, what draws a community together, and political power, these actually have huge resonances with ancient Greek poetry. Most of us today experience Homer and ancient Greek poetry in this way, as a book. It's something we read. Or maybe we don't read it as a book, we read it on the internet. I had a few questions, how can I get the books? I know you have an assignment due the first week, Professor Chew. I can't just get the book off the bat. I can tell you that Homer is widely available all over the internet. You can find all kinds of translations of the Odyssey and the Iliad. We are reading books 1 through 11 of the Odyssey for our first assignment. Please keep in mind that this book is abridged, which means, so it's not the entire books 1 through 11 of the Odyssey. It's a sort of condensed reading assignment. If you are reading this on the web, you're going to have to read all 11 of the books of the Odyssey. Also, the translations I want you to know of the Odyssey that are on the internet are fine, but sometimes, so you should know this. Of course, Homer wrote in ancient Greek. Translations have copyrights on them. So, in other words, this translation by Stanley Lombardo, who is a great person, and a translator who is retired now and lives in Kansas, it's copyrighted. So, it's not available on the web unless you buy it. You can get a lot of older translations on the web. They are sometimes written in really archaic language from even the 19th century. So, in other words, I find them just much, much harder to understand. So, I encourage you to buy preferably the book that I've assigned, also because it has a great introduction with some really helpful information if you're not overly familiar with Homer or just want a refresher about the ancient Greeks. I can only squeeze so much into one of these lectures. Or you can also get another translation. If you go to the library and they have a different translation, maybe by someone named Robert Fitzgerald or someone named Robert Fagles, those are fine too. The beauty of Homer is that his original words are copyright free. So I encourage you to use one of those. If you have any questions about this though, or the textbooks, send me an email, and we can try to figure some things out. Especially since it's the first week or two of class, when it's harder to get all the materials. Back to Greek poetry. So even though we read Greek poetry from the ancient Greeks, poetry was closely allied with music, with song. I mean, at the opening of Homer's epics, the poet does what we call, he invokes the muse. Now, the muses, the muses are ancient Greek goddesses of poetry, muses, and the word music indeed comes from the word muse. Another thing to keep in mind about ancient Greek poetry is that it was Homer's poems were performed with the lyre, with a stringed instrument, and they were performed in a meter. This meter in Homer is something called dactylic hexameter. Yes, I can write without looking at the board. I taught middle school once upon a time. When you taught middle school, you need to look at your students. Anyways, a dactylic hexameter is this particular meter. And these meters really give ancient Greek poetry their kind of rhythm and music. You know, if you've read, I always use the example of Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote in what's called iambic pentameter. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaf hath all too short to date. Okay, that's the opening one of Shakespeare's sonnets. The dactylic hexameter that Homer writes in, it looks like this. This is what we call a dactyl. It is what we call a foot of poetry. This is a long sound, and this is a short, short. So long, short, short. This is called a dactyl. Now, this part of the word hexameter, hex, actually means 6 in Greek. So you take 6 dactyls, you stick them together. 3, 4, 5. Can't write on my wall. That's a dactyl. That's what then we call that a dactylic hexameter. So, you know, the opening of the Odyssey, which we know as Speak, memory of the cunning hero, the wanderer blown off course time and again after he plundered Troy's sacred heights. It's Lombardo's translation, or in Greek, it's Andromo ennepimusa pollutrobos hos malapola, plancte petroiesi rum pathiethone per se polo, nandropo nidun astea kaino and egno pola again ponto, patan algea hon patadumon. That's the ancient Greek. I don't think the Greeks actually pronounced it that way. We don't really know how the ancient Greeks pronounced Greek. You know, there were no recording devices back in the 8th century BCE, before the Common Era, or BC. So that's another way of referring to time. That's roughly around the time that Homer lived, and roughly around the time these epics were composed. We don't know exactly when Homer composed his epics, because Homer lived at a time before writing was a widespread practice in ancient Greece or in the ancient Greek Mediterranean world. Writing certainly existed before Homer lived. If I go into the history of writing, we're never going to get back to O Brother, Where Art Thou? But roughly around the time that Homer, who may or may not have been a real person, flourished, lived, writing, we again see evidence of writing in ancient Greece. But almost nobody knew how to write. Meaning Homer himself may not well have known how to write. We have no evidence for any of this. But a Homeric poet would have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines of poetry in dactylic hexameter in his head, and he would have recited these stories about heroes, about bold deeds, about adventures, about, you know, crazy travels, you know, of heroes like Odysseus or Hercules, and to audiences, and, you know, all this would have been by memory. This is not to say that, you know, we can't know for sure. You know, again, we don't have exact records of any of this, but scholars think that Homer and other ancient poets composed their poems orally, or we speak of something called oral composition. So, in other words, a Homeric poet would have had in his memory a vast store of different lines of poetry, sort of, you know, maybe the way you have a line of a song that gets stuck in your head and you apply it maybe in some, you know, unusual, you know, in a context that maybe isn't actually fitted to it. You know, you can think of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? There's the poem, A Man of Constant Sorrows. You know, that idea of constant sorrows. Is there ever a moment in your life when you feel like you are a student of constant sorrows? I'm kind of getting stuck on that idea of constant sorrows because that whole idea of having suffered lots of things, experienced lots of things, been through lots of things, it's fundamental to the idea of Odysseus in the Odyssey. Is an epithet or a set of words, a phrase that's often used to describe Odysseus as polytropos. Okay, this is the Greek polytropos. This means many turning. Odysseus is a flexible man. He's been through many things. He's been through many places. He's experienced lots and lots of different things. Sort of, you know, I mean, in some ways you could say that's kind of what's going on in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I mean, when the movie came out in 2000, people loved it. I mean, it's a great movie. It's really entertaining. It's funny. It's great to see George Clooney acting, you know, like as if he were the marquee actor Clark Gable, playing, you know, an escaped jailbird lawyer, it's a fun movie. You know, there's all kinds of, you know, great set pieces in the movie. However, the movie critic Ebert gave the movie a 2.5-star rating, and other critics felt that the movie, even as amusing and clever as it was, the plot, especially, you know, if you look at it now, it could be called, you know, a bunch of episodes pieced together. I mean, you know, it's even not terribly resolved, you know, what happens to Pete and Dalmar at the end of the movie. So it's definitely an enjoyable movie. It's got a lot of tricks. It certainly makes a couple of references here and there to the Odyssey. But, you know, the plot of the movie is, one could say, perhaps a little weak. I think that, you know, as a classics professor, I really enjoy the references, you know, classics professors, you know, it's always fascinating to see something that's so important to us, the Odyssey, appearing in popular culture. You know, I also, though, take this idea of, you know, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou as being this sort of, you know, crazy mashup of different episodes. You know, I mean, in some ways you could say that this might be going a little too far, but the Odyssey. You know, in the Odyssey, Odysseus goes through one journey after the other. He travels all over the Mediterranean on his way home from Troy. And he, you know, he has all kinds of crazy adventures. He gets seduced by a beautiful woman, by a witch even. He, you know, he says, you know, he takes his 20 years to get home to his wife Penelope. You know, here's some of the beautiful women the sirens who seduce Everett and Pete and Dalmar in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But this is just a link to sort of, you know, a very sort of simple little map about Odysseus and, you know, his different travels. Odysseus starts off, you know, in Troy, and he's trying to get back home to Ithaca, which is in the center here. I'm not pointing to it appropriately. Anyways, but he travels all around the Mediterranean before he gets back home, you know, and you know, it includes a trip to the underworld. All kinds of things happen to Odysseus. So perhaps you could say that from, you know, there's certainly references and connections we can make between the plot of the Odyssey and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But what I want you to think about as you're watching the movie or watching it again, as you're reading the Odyssey or reviewing it again, is the importance of song and sound. Another word, mythos. From Greek, mythos does give us the word for myth. In ancient Greek, it also has the simple meaning of a traditional tale. In particular, a tale that is orally transmitted, that is passed down. Again, you know, Homer's, again, composed his poems in an era when people did not write. When people experienced literature not as a matter of letters or the written word, but as something that they heard. So, you know, as you're watching the movie, I'm really asking you, to even think about the fact the music won a great deal of renown. Critics love the music. They love the way that, in some ways, what the movie really did was it took a lot of this really, this vernacular American music of the 20s and 30s and showed it is kind of weird and intense itself. it shows a world of magic, superstition, and deep feeling. You know, there's something about this music that has persisted, you know, and, you know, it became popular again, you know, and the movie helped to do it, presenting it in whatever way it did. And again, even that whole idea of the man of constant sorrows, you know, I think that's kind of an every person song that can, in its own way, appeal to a lot of us. So as you're listening to the music, and actually our first essay assignment asks you to listen closely to the music. So I hope some of these things that I've said here are helpful for that. You know, keep in mind, there's a song in the early part of the movie, which is, it stands out from the other music in the movie because most of the songs in O Brother, Where Art Thou, even though they date from the 20th and 30th century, they're recorded by contemporary American artists like Gillian Welch, Alison Krauss, and other bluegrass artists. But there's a song called The Big Rock Candy Mountain that gets played. It's very early in the movie while some of the titles are going by, sung by a singer named Harry McClintock. And it actually is the only song in the movie it's a recording that was done in the early 20th century, and it's the only song that actually, that in the movie is from, you know, the actual period that the movie's supposed to be set in. So it has a little bit of a different flavor, you know, it kind of gives you an introduction. And, you know, as one critic says, you know, there's something about the movie, that song itself, The Big Rock Candy Mountain, you know, maybe that's what we're all, you know, striving for, to get to that big rock candy mountain, to get to that world where, you know, we don't have to work, where, you know, we don't have to, the land of milk and honey, you know, where there's no injustice, there's no chain gang. Well, the world is, you know, sort of a happy fantasy place. So I will leave you with that. And please, you know, email me again with any questions about anything. I'm glad to get in touch. I know we have some assignments due. One of them includes a quiz that will be available on Thursday morning. And also a short essay that will be due by Friday. So, you know, those essays, they don't have to be the most polished thing you ever wrote, you know, but they should, you know, correct grammar, complete sentences, etc. But, you know, I'm really interested in your thoughts about the topic that I've posted. So thanks very much, and get in touch with me with any questions.